Hey everyone, welcome back to my Roguelike and Godot for Complete Beginner series. Today we're going to be working on animating our player. This is going to look a lot like what we did for our swordsman character, but we're also going to be adding in our shooting animation and shooting arrows at the enemy. So to get started, we're going to need to get access to those extra sprite sheets because remember, all of our sprite sheets are in separate files. All right, once we've got access to those variables, let's go ahead and add an animation player to our player node. I'm going to create a function called animate player, where we're going to handle the logic of what sheet should our texture be using based on what our player is doing. In this, we're basically just going to be paying attention to our direction. Remember that our player is going to be shooting while standing still. So if our direction is 0, then we're only going to be playing our idle animation while we are on cooldown for our shoot animation based on our attack speed. Like if our attack speed is really slow, then we're going to have to spend some time idling there while we're waiting to shoot. Otherwise, if our direction equals anything that isn't 0, we're going to be using our run animation. We're also going to be keeping track of whether our player is facing left or right, so that way it doesn't look like he's running backwards. To do that, I'm just going to create a var, call it facing right, and it's going to be a bool, and I'm going to set it to true. Now in our animate player function, I'm going to say if our direction is equal to a vector2 dot 0. Remember, we're not just comparing is this equal to 0, because direction is of type vector2, which is two variables, 0, 0. And so if our direction is 0, what I'm going to do, we need to get access to our sprite. So I'm going to make an onReady var. I'm just going to call it sprite. And we use our $sign to get access to our nodes. And here it shows all of the nodes that we have. I'm going to get access to our sprite 2D. I'm also going to get access to our animation player while I'm up here doing the same thing. So then down here, I'm going to go ahead and set our sprite texture, sprite dot texture, to equal our idle sheet. And then I'm going to have our animation player play, and we'll call it idle. We'll still have to make this animation in our animation player, but we'll get there. So then I'm going to use an else statement. Remember, this happens if any of our conditions are not met. So if we're not moving, we're idling. Otherwise, we're running. We'll get a little bit more in depth with idling once we implement our shooting. So otherwise we're running. We're going to set our sprite texture to our run sheet. And we are going to have our animation player play run. Also in the movement section of our animate player, I'm going to put an if statement that will say if direction.x, remember this is us moving left to right, is greater than or equal to 0, I want us to be facing right. Otherwise, I want us to be facing left, which I'm just going to say facing right is false. Then down at the bottom of all of this, I'm going to say that our sprite dot flip h equals, and then whatever our facing right variable is set to. So flip h, basically all that does is right down the middle of your sprite, it flips it to face one way or the other. This is a really easy way to just get your sprites facing left or right based on how you are moving. The reason that we need to store this in a variable that I called facing right, and you can call whatever you want, is because when we start idling, our direction.x is going to be 0. And every frame, we're going to be calling this animate player. And so it's going to want to idle. We need to be able to tell it if we were walking left, we want it to play idle facing left, because that would look really weird if we were walking right, stopped walking, and immediately flipped directions. So now let's go ahead and make our idle and run animations in our animation player. Let's go ahead and click on your animation player. Go ahead and click new. And we're going to name this exactly how we have it written in our script, which is lowercase. We're going to say idle. So if we go ahead and pull our idle animation into our texture and open it up, we can see that it is a 6-frame animation. And we were using like 0.1 seconds per frame. So I'm just going to go ahead and set this to be 0.6 seconds long. And I want it to snap to our 0.1 seconds. And then I'm going to go ahead and just key every frame in here. Don't forget to set it to looping, because this is a looping animation. And if you click play just to see it. And just like with our swordsman, don't forget that we need to key how many H frames that we have, because we have 6 frames in our idle animation, but we're only going to have 4 in our run, and I think that there are several in the shoot animation. We'll go ahead and key it. Now let's go ahead and do our run animation. So new, run, and let's set our sprite to our run animation just for while we're testing it. And this one has 4 H frames. So we're going to go ahead and set our time to be 0.4 seconds long, looping, snap to 0.1, and we are going to key all 4 frames. And if we play it, it's about what it looks like. And we're going to key how many H frames that we have. Now I'm just going to make sure that we call our animate player function in our physics process. I'm realizing that I think I put this in backwards. We only want to flip H if they're facing left, because by default these are facing right, so we don't want them flipped. Unless they turn left, then we want to flip them. So by putting a exclamation point in front of this, we are saying the opposite of whatever our variable is. So if we are not facing right, then we want to flip it. If we go ahead and test this, we can see that he's idling, he walks left, he's idling. All right, that looks pretty good to me. Now for our player to be able to shoot, since we want him to attack only as fast as his attack speed is, we need some way to measure the time between attacks to make sure that there actually is a spacing between each. So of course, we are going to be using a timer node. I'm going to rename this in case we want to use any other timers. I'm just going to name this attack timer. And I'm going to go ahead and get access to it. We'll worry about actually scaling our wait time with our attack speed later. I'm going to go ahead and set this to 1 shot, where basically what I want to happen is I want us to attack, and then our timer will run, and then once it's done, we'll use something in the timeout function, and then it'll be primed and ready to go again if the player is choosing to still attack. So with that in mind, I'm also going to create a var can attack, and I'm going to set this to true. Can attack is going to be the variable that we use to decide whether or not the player is able to attack based on their attack speed and cooldown. I'm going to go ahead and create a new function called attack. And in this function, I'm basically just going to spawn an arrow, and we'll talk about how to do that. Set everything so that arrow flies at our enemy. And then I'm going to start our attack timer and set can attack to false. And then we're going to use whether this is false or true in our animation for whether we're playing idle or attack. So for the time being, I'm just going to say print, and we're going to say that we shot the arrow. I'm going to say can attack is false, and I'm going to say attack timer dot start. Now I'm going to connect our timeout function from our attack timer, and I'm just going to say can attack is true. Now, under my animate player function, when we're not moving, we are either idling or attacking. So I'm going to say if we can attack, we're going to do something. Otherwise, we are idling. Now for our attack, I want us to look at our archer shoot. We don't want to spawn our arrow immediately when the archer starts, because you can see that he takes his hand back into his quiver, he pulls out an arrow, he takes some time to string it, and then he shoots it. So what we're probably going to do is have our attack function be called on this frame. And actually, maybe we should have can attack get changed to false at the very end of our animation. Let's go ahead and make a new animation. Let's just call it attack. I'm going to go ahead and set our sprite to archer shoot. So that way we can look at it while we're animating. And we have 8 horizontal frames. So I'm going to set our duration to 0.8. Make sure that you're going at 0.1 intervals. And I'm going to go ahead and key all of our frames. And I'm going to, at the very beginning, key how many horizontal frames that we have. And I think right here on this 0.5 frame is where we're going to want to call our attack function. So I'm going to add a method track. And I'm going to insert our key for attack right here at 0.5. Then at the very end, I'm going to add a property track. Don't forget to export your can attack var. I just spent like 5 minutes wondering why this property wasn't showing up in my animation player when I was trying to add the property track. If you don't export it, your animation player won't be able to access it. So we're going to grab our can attack, and right here at the very end, we are going to insert the key and we are going to set it to false. And we are not going to set this animation to looping because in theory, he's only going to be attacking the once. Eventually, your attack speed might get so high that it looks like it's looping, but we'll cross that bridge if we get there. Actually, I think too that I want my attack timer to start at the very end of this animation rather than in the middle. So our attack method is just going to be used to spawn our arrow in, and then we're going to handle can attack and our attack timer start just here at the end of this animation track. So we're going to go ahead and add another call method track, and we're going to choose our attack timer as the node that we want to connect. And right here at the very end, we are going to connect the start method. We'll go ahead and remove that function from our attack. So now we want to go back up here into our animations, and we want to say that if we are able to attack, then we're going to take our animation player and we are going to play attack. We also need to set our sprite sheet. So we're going to say sprite.texture is going to be equal to our shoot sheet. So now if we go in and we test this, you can see that he'll stand there, he'll shoot the other way. And if we walk around for a while, we want him to be primed and ready to attack as soon as he stops, and he does. Now we actually want him to shoot an arrow. In order to do that, we're going to need to create an arrow scene, and we're going to instantiate that scene, or basically spawn one in every time that the attack animation is called. To do that, I want to go down to our prefabs, and I want us to create a new scene, and we're going to click on this right here to choose a different type of node. And I think I want us to use character body 2D because I think we're going to be influencing its direction with script, especially if we program in like heat-seeking arrows. And I'm just going to call this arrow. We're going to try to make this generic enough that this same arrow scene can be used by both enemies and players. So first thing, let's go ahead and add a sprite so that way we can see it. And I'm going to go into our assets and just set the texture to our arrow.png. I want to go ahead and add a collision shape to it. And I'm probably just going to make this like a rectangle around it. I'm going to turn off this snapping because I think that it's preventing me from getting a good fit. Remember that you're trying to generally make hitboxes feel fair, not necessarily accurate. So it would probably be more accurate if I made some sort of triangular hitbox on just the arrowhead, but this will probably feel more fair to the player. That is a judgment call on your side though, and you can do that however you want to. As I'm thinking about it, I think I want to add a new collision layer for our arrows. I'm just going to call it projectiles in case we ever add any more. I'm ending up doing this because I don't want our projectiles to physically collide with our player or enemy. I just want them to be able to pass through their bodies. By putting this on its own collision layer, we're going to be able to have our players like collision box be different from their hurt box, which will encapsulate their entire body rather than just like a small portion of it. So the hurt box area of both our player and our enemy will be able to detect when the arrow comes in, but the two character bodies won't actually collide with each other. So with that in mind, I am going to set this to be on the projectile layer, and I'm going to have it look to player, enemy, and environment. Because remember, we kind of want these arrows to not be able to go through rocks. So let's go ahead and add a script to our arrow. I'm just going to call it arrow, and we'll put it in prefabs. Now, for most of the time, when you're making prefabs like this, if you want to keep your file tree organized, go ahead and create a folder and just call this folder arrow, and then you'll just put the arrow scene and script in here. This can seem very redundant, but I promise it makes things look so much better. Also, if you ever decide to restructure the way that your files look in this tree, always do it in the Godot editor, not in like your Windows File Explorer, because when you move files around in the Godot editor, it'll do its best to try and keep everything connected. But if you move stuff around in Windows Explorer or whatever file system you have, the editor won't know where you moved stuff to. So I think in order to get our arrow to fly the way that we want it to, we're going to need to create a variable called target. I'm going to have this be set by whatever is spawning it, whether it be an enemy, archer, or us. And the target is going to be the actual node that this is chasing. This will be nice if we program it this way, because again, if we choose to do heat-seeking arrows, we need to have the target's location constantly updated in order to be able to fly towards it. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to type of character body 2D, because we know that this is always going to be chasing an enemy or a player, which are character body 2Ds. I'm also going to go ahead and create a class name for this, and I'm just going to call it arrow, so that when we're accessing it from other places, we'll have visibility on all of its variables. We also need like a flight speed var. I guess we could make this a constant, since this probably won't be changing. And I'm going to set it to arbitrarily 200, and we can maybe adjust this number as needed. For now, I'm going to put this in the ready function, where we're just going to set our target vector to position of the target that we're going after just once right at the very beginning, because these will not be heat seeking. When we make that change later, we can adjust. To store that, I'm going to create a new var, and I'm going to call it target chords, and this is going to be a vector 2. And then I'm just going to set in our ready function, our target chords is going to be equal to our target.position. Now, in our physics process, I want us to get our direction to our target chords, and we need to be able to fly to this. So I'm going to set our velocity to equal this direction times our flight speed. Now our arrow should fly straight towards either the enemy or the player. To make this a little bit cleaner, I'm going to go ahead and take this, and I'm going to save this as a direction variable. So var direction is going to equal this, and then we can plug in direction right here. And now I actually want to rotate the angle of our arrows. If you look at our arrow, it's just facing this way. And so if it's flying up to an enemy that's above us, it's going to fly like this. We want it to fly like this. Godot has a super easy way to set the direction. All you have to do is take our direction. I'm going to create a new var called angle, and I'm going to set it to direction dot angle. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set our rotation, which is a property that every node 2D has. Under node 2D, we have rotation. This just lets us spin things around. I'm going to be setting our top node's rotation, because the rotation of everything under it also gets adjusted. So our sprite will also rotate, and our collision shape, which is going to be matching our arrow, is also going to rotate up. We wouldn't just want to rotate our sprite, because then our sprite would look like this, but our collision shape would look like this, and that would not be fun to play with. So we're just going to say rotation equals angle. And if I'm not crazy, I'm pretty sure that will just work. Now I want us to go ahead over to our player node, and in our attack function, we're going to need to spawn in this arrow. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create an export variable called arrow scene string, and I'm going to set this to type string. Then what we can do is in our file system, we can take our path by clicking on our arrow scene here, and we can just hit Control or Command A, Control C to copy, and Control V to paste that in our string. Now we basically have the same thing going on here, except we were able to export it as a variable. And now in our ready function, which we don't have one in here, so let's go ahead and make one. we can set, let's make a global variable. I'm just going to call this arrow scene, and I'm going to make it of type arrow. We can say arrow scene equals load, and then our arrow scene string. So this is interesting, and I didn't realize this. When you're trying to load a resource in, even though this scene is of type arrow, when you're actually loading it in, it is of type resource until you instantiate that scene, and then that scene becomes an arrow. So why don't we set this arrow scene just to be of type resource, and we'll leave that be for now. Then in our attack animation, we want to actually spawn some arrows in. So let's take our new arrow by saying every time we attack, we're going to create a new arrow, and we're going to want to adjust some properties of that arrow. So we're going to save that arrow as a variable that we can manipulate a little bit before we just instantiate it into the world. So I'm going to say var new arrow is going to be of type arrow, and it is going to be our arrow scene dot instantiate. This dot instantiate has thrown me off so many times because for whatever reason, the engine doesn't recognize this as a function when you type it in. But what this will do is it will take our arrow scene resource and it is going to load it as a scene. But even though now we have instantiated it, it doesn't yet exist in the world. What we need to do is add it as a child of our world scene. A common mistake is to start adding the arrows or whatever as a child of the player. But the reason why that's not going to work is because the player is going to be moving around. And if you remember, all the children of a given node have their position locked to their parent's position. So if the player starts moving up, all the arrows are going to move with the player. So we need to instantiate it and add it as a child of something a little bit higher up the scene tree. What I normally like to do is go to my level scene, and I'm just going to add a blank node 2D, and I'm just going to name this as arrow holder. And you'll remember that we can use these global groups to get access to stuff from other scripts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make level 1 a part of a new global group called main scene. Every single one of our main levels, like the topmost node in a given level, whether that be our actual levels or later on in our menus, whatever the topmost is going to be, we're going to set that to main scene. So that way our children can always get access to that rather than any of the other things that might exist towards the top of our scene tree. So now that level 1 is a main scene, and you're going to have to set this for all of your levels. Make sure that all of your levels are set to main scene. We can go to our player, and in our ready script, we can get access to this. I am just going to create a new var. I'm going to call this current scene, and I'm going to set it to type, I guess just node 2D. And then in our ready, we can say our current scene equals get tree. Remember, this will start us off at the very top of our scene tree. And then we are going to get first node in group main scene. So now our player has direct access to our main scene. And what we are going to do is we are going to main scene or current scene dot add child, and we're going to add our new arrow in. And remember that there's one really important thing that we need to do with our arrow, and that is to give it a target. We need some way to get access to all of our enemies. The way that I like to do this is under my level scene, I like to just add a blank node 2D, and I'm going to rename this to enemy holder. And then I'm going to go ahead and put our swordsman as a child of this, and any other enemies that we're going to spawn in, I'm going to put them as a child of enemy holder. Now, in order to have access to this, I think the best way would be to give our level a script, and then have our level have a variable called list of enemies, and have a function that will get access to every single enemy that is in the enemy holder. And then our player can take access to that list of all known enemies and calculate which one is the closest to it. And that enemy will be the enemy that we shoot at. So I'm going to go into my level 1 scene, and I'm going to add a script. Just call it level 1. Keep in mind, though, that you're probably going to recycle this script for every single one of your scenes. There is a little bit of a more efficient way to do this with scene inheritance. It can definitely be clunky at times to work with, which is why I'm kind of avoiding it for this tutorial. And maybe I'll cover it at a later date. But for now, let's just go ahead and use an onReady var to get access to our enemy holder. And in a ready func, let's go ahead and say for child in enemy holder dot get children. What this will do is it will iterate through every child of a given scene. So like when we've been using get tree dot get first node in group, what it's doing is it's going through all of its children and it's checking for certain things. So we're just going to go through all of the children and we're going to add this to a variable called enemy list. And we're going to make this an empty array. I don't think we've used arrays yet. If you don't know what an array is basically just a list of variables. You can type arrays so that they can only hold one type of variable in them, like an integer array, or in our case, like an enemy array. But I believe they can also work kind of like Python lists where you can have many different kinds of variables within that array. But basically all we're going to do is for each child in here, we are going to take enemy list and we are going to append that child. Appending is basically just taking whatever the new variable is and tacking it on the end of the list. And thinking about this a little bit further, we're going to want this to happen more than just at the beginning, because let's say that we have enemies spawning like over time in our level. The enemies that are in this list are going to change and we won't get access to them. So why don't we create a new function called get enemies, and let's put this code down here. And in ready, we're just going to call get enemies. And we will also wipe our enemy list each time to be empty. Because if some enemies die, we want them removed from this list. So now that we have this enemy list, I'm going to make this class name level. So now when we go into our player, we can say for enemy in current scene dot enemy list. And now we need to find some way to tell which enemy is the closest to us. For this, we can just use the handy distance formula or Godot's built-in function distance2, which just uses the distance formula. And it will find, which one is the closest to us. So I'm going to set var closest distance. I'm going to set this number arbitrarily to some really high number because we're looking for the closest distance. If we started off closest distance at a number like 0, there will be no enemy that is closer than 0. So by setting this to some random high number, we're guaranteeing that whatever enemy that we're checking the distance to, they're always going to have a number lower than this. There's probably a better way to do that, but this is a super simple, gets the job done type solution. Now what we want to say is if enemy dot position dot distance to, and then our position, if that is less than our closest distance, then we want to say that our new closest distance is this, and then we want to store which enemy that was, so that way we can set that as our target enemy. So I'm going to say our target enemy is going to be blank here. And then we will set target enemy to equal. Now, when we go to add our child, we're going to set new arrow's target to this enemy before we add it. Remember that the ready function gets called after it has been added to the scene. So if we try to add this to the scene before we set our target, then it's not going to be able to run this function because target.position won't exist yet. So if we assign the variable before we add it to the scene, then target will have been set before ready is called. So we're going to take new arrow and we are going to set our target to equal target enemy. Okay, and we don't just want to add this to the current scene, we want to add this to current scene dot arrow holder. So let's go to our level script and let's get access to our arrow holder. And then in our player, we can say current scene dot arrow holder dot add child. And when we add this to our scene, by default, its coordinates are 0, 0, which is going to be up at the very top corner of our level, which we don't want. We want it to spawn like where our player is standing. If you wanted to be specific, you could probably try and get it to spawn where the bow is, so that it looks like it's shooting out of the bow when he's firing. I am not going to worry about that. Instead, all I'm going to do is I'm going to say new arrow dot position is going to be equal to our position, which will spawn it exactly where we are standing. Doing some minor debugging, don't forget to change your arrow's motion mode to floating. And one more thing, it helps if you actually add move and slide to your physics process. Otherwise, your objects are not going to move. Alrighty, so if we go ahead and retest this out, we can see that our guy shoots our arrows. They are getting stuck on the rocks. They are successfully passing through the enemy. But you can definitely tell that we have some very weird issues to address. For starters, those arrows are going to their target destination and then just jittering there. They should maybe disappear, or maybe stop fully if you want them to like stay stuck in the ground. That might be a cool thing. Also, those arrows will never despawn. So if your player is shooting tons of arrows and a level takes a really long time, you'll eventually end up with so many arrows in that arrow holder that your game will probably crash because it runs out of memory. There's lots of little quirks like that going on, and we definitely will fix those, but I think we are out of time for today. If I haven't already emphasized this enough, let me do so again. Do not be hard on yourself if you end up doing something wrong, if something doesn't work the way that you first anticipated it to, especially on the first try. Because even I, someone with a lot of experience and getting ready to publish my own game, still make so many mistakes. Like, I forgot to add move and slide to this arrow, so I was shooting these arrows. I'm like, where are they? They were standing still right underneath me. Those kinds of mistakes are going to happen. Don't beat yourself up over them. Just correct it. Try to remember it for next time, even though you're going to forget it again, I promise. And just move on. And just keep working on your game, keep getting better. I promise it only gets more fun from here. So yeah, next time we'll address some of those issues, but I think we've run out of time for today. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate you all, and I appreciate you bearing with me. I know sometimes these uploads are a little bit slow. It's been a bit of an adjustment getting into publishing videos, especially regularly. So I appreciate you bearing with me with that also. If you've been liking what you've been seeing, be sure to like the video and please subscribe to the channel. It helps both to widen my reach as well as will help keep you in touch for when I upload my videos, because I know that they're not always consistent. Thank you all again. Take it easy.